for it.
Awesome.
Hello, everybody. It's Sarah Seidelman. I'm happy to be here with Devon Ervin, who has written this amazing book called The Reluctant Caregiver. Reclaiming my life. I was going to say reclaiming my voice, which we'll get into that. Reclaiming my life after caring for a stroke survivor, a memoir. And it's a wonderful book, and I'm so blessed. We're so blessed to have Devon here. So thank you so much for being here. Devon, can you just, I guess I wanted to ask you just sort of like maybe to tell us a little bit of, let's see, how do I want to start this? My question is, about one of the things that's a theme in the book is that not only does your partner have a stroke, but you are married, and kind of the complexity that having that added on top of the challenges of a marriage and communication sort of falling apart and these things. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, because I found that part of it particularly poignant. Yeah, just really was interested in that aspect of marriage. And yeah.
Thank you.
We should just start, like, give a brief overview of kind of a little bit of what happened so that people who haven't read the book yet will have some idea.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you, Sarah, for having me here. I appreciate it. So the book is the story. It takes place over maybe a decade of the journey after my former husband had a stroke in his 40s. I was, and they couldn't really figure out why. So, he healed, got better. We adopted a couple kids, and then he had another massive stroke. The biggest challenge with both of them was aphasia, which is the where someone retains their intelligence but is unable to communicate or understand language. And there's different varying ways that shows up. But so he knew what he wanted to say, but couldn't say it, couldn't make his mouth work, couldn't make his hands work, couldn't communicate. So we went from having a very long-term relationship to not being able to communicate while parenting little ones. And it just, it was a big unraveling and re-raveling, I guess, at some point. And I think one of the things that I discovered in myself was, as he lost his ability to communicate, I became his voice and lost mine. And so a lot of that autonomy I had was gone. And so a lot of the book is really about reclaiming that and understanding how I so easily handed that over to someone, even though that was not who I was. So I think
and I think of how many, there's so many circumstances in which as women, maybe, or as people who identify as female, where we can lose our voice to many different things, but in your case, to your husband. But I was thinking about how with sick children or children who have lots of needs, that same thing could be the case for somebody. I loved in the book when there was also a point where it was really hard for you to even communicate or sense who, your husband as he originally was. Like, there was this disconnect between being able to know him, and one of his therapies, they had him singing, and you had a really, really neat scene in the book about that. So one of his physical or therapies was to sing. They'd assigned him to sing a song. And can you explain a little bit about that, like what singing in that part of the brain? Because I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. So when he had his first stroke, it was centered right in the language center in the brain. So pretty much just wiped out language for a period of time. And singing and music is actually stored in a different part of the brain. So he could sing songs that he couldn't say. And, he's as he was learning to talk again, because he had to learn to talk again because his mouth would not form sounds, like, put your tongue in this position and your lips in this position, and learning to say A and B and all those things again. But he could sing it. So he had the memory for that. So it was really bizarre. So as he's learning to talk, and he's talking very much like maybe a toddler would, so I couldn't hear him in those, things. And, there's lots of other complexities that go with that, but couldn't hear him. But when he sang, I could hear him. And it was really profound. That was during a speech therapy session. But he had no idea what he was singing, because he also couldn't understand his own words in addition to understanding our words. So he had no idea what he was singing. And it was just all memory that was way back in there somewhere.
Yeah, and you're telling, you do such a great job of making the sort of the neuroanatomic and the medical part of this really comprehensible, and it just makes us realize like so much we take for granted, not only that we speak, but we understand what we speak and we can hear it and get it. It's like, and prior to the singing session, I remember there was a scene where your husband is singing the alphabet song because he's trying to learn these sounds, and it's driving batty. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I mean, just all the levels of frustration and how you kept it together and didn't always keep it together because you're a human being,
Right.
and just the frustration. And I think from this story, well, not only, I just have such a deeper compassion. I hope that every single person who's taking care of people who have, or taking care of families who have brain injuries, that people read this story, because to understand like what goes on after that clinic door closes, and just what people are left with is just, amazingly challenging. Then there was a scene, there was a, let's see, there was a scene in some parts of this were quite funny, and just like I enjoyed, there was a scene where you and your husband, this was at some point where recovery is good enough that you actually go to an Airbnb for the weekend. And it sounds like you have a pretty good time. And in the morning, you're having breakfast with some total strangers. and then something happens. And your husband has a pretty funny response. But can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. And that story, it is funny and it's complex. We were probably, I don't know, a year and a half into his first recovery from the first stroke. Didn't yet have kids. And it's really funny. I'm very introverted. I'm the classic, writer. I love to talk, but, going to a bed and breakfast was always his thing, because he was always gregarious and loved to talk. And I'm just like, okay, we're going to do this because I'm trying to be normal here. And this is what we would do, but I would never talk. So I'm talking and he's just observing and listening. And I don't want to give away the whole story, but we just meet this really interesting cast of characters. And I had this thing that was happening in my life at that time where anytime somebody was in the medical world, I was curious. I mean, he had had this massive stroke. He had no risk factors for stroke. He was a super healthy guy and in his 40s, and nobody could tell us why. And so, of course, anytime I met somebody who was a medical professional, it was like, I would just pick their brain. And so I'm doing that. And this person said they were a doctor. So I'm just picking the brain, but it slowly becomes apparent that I'm not sure. I was probably more qualified to explain a stroke at that point than this person was. And her partner was what I would consider woo-woo, but I'm very woo-woo too. So it was an interesting thing, but anyway, I don't.
You don't have to give away the story.
Yeah, I won't give away that story, but I was, judging them, thinking they were really quirky. And then my husband ends up having this really loud response, and pretty much everybody at the table left. And so we became the quirky ones, and it was really funny.
Yeah, those awkward moments. Well, speaking of like spirituality, like Can you speak to that? Like, how did, often when we go through a really challenging experience, sometimes people's faith in spirit or God or their beliefs, get stronger. And in some people's, it kind of falls apart. They are like, I thought I believed in God and now I don't, or you were mad at God or something like that. And I'm just wondering, how did that go for you?
Um, yes. So when I was in it, I think the way I connected to God was through my writing. So it's always been through my writing, and the God of my understanding. And I was pretty turned off by organized religion at that time because my former husband was atheist, and I'm pretty, I have my own beliefs about God, and I just couldn't understand, you know, how any of that was going to be helpful and to us in that space. And so I was pretty turned off to it. And then I continued to connect through my writing, through my journaling, through, a lot of the different meditating and things that I do, and connecting with nature and animals, and those things are really meaningful for me. And when I had I don't know, kind of a clairaudient moment where I got a message to write the book. That was the 3 words: write the book. So I knew I had to write the book. And so that was really clear to me. And a lot of the book was written with assistance, I guess, with my guides, whoever, just where I would just sit down and write and a story would come out. Or I would remember something and I could just drop into that space. And my poetry is also done that way. That's been true probably most of my life. So it's, but I guess that's the way I connect.
That's how you connect. I love that. That's so wonderful.
Mhm.
And yeah, I wanted to there may be people who are listening to this who have gone through, something that they want to write a memoir, they would like to tell their story so that they might help. And I'm guessing that's just because you want to reach out that hand back to somebody else who's going through something. Like, did you keep a diary the whole time? Because there's so much beautiful detail in here, or did you, some of it just come back, as you said, just by sitting with it and like memories popped back in?
I journaled. It wasn't like always. There was times where it was really hard to journal. I just couldn't. And sometimes I would just journal about completely other things, or wrote a lot of poetry at that time. I think when I would have a flash of a story, like I would have a memory, like something would spark something, and I would write that one sentence down, and then I would go back and I would really just drop back into that memory and then write from there. And I did a lot of therapy during that because, dropping back into a memory, it's like all the trauma is there. And so it was a healing for me. I didn't know that until I was, pretty far into it. That as I wrote, and I would, encourage people, if you have something traumatic, and writing is kind of the way that you connect to your higher power or God, that may be a healing vessel for you as well. And to drop in, write those stories, get the therapy or the coaching, and just move your way through it. I, it also helped me to go to the ocean and just scream. But it's like, for me, it was, really just, the writing was the healing. And I
Yeah.
think, and it healed not just me, but my, my relationship with my now former husband, my, just all the healing that happened beyond me as a result of that. And he's, it's a tough book for someone who's in his position, but he's like probably my biggest fan and supporter, because, he didn't ask for any of that. He's not,
Right.
Not the villain in the story. So
Right. And nothing is candy coated in this. It's very honest. It's very frank. And I really appreciate that because I think one of the things that can just add guilt and shame on top of everything else is when we're trying to caregiving and then we're trying to be perfect or we're trying, and none of us need that because we're not. And your poetry is so beautiful and it's just sprinkled in it, just really beautiful moments. And one of the poems that I was hoping maybe you would read, this is, I'm guessing you wrote this at this time that was a little bit after or 4 years after the second stroke. So we're pretty far into this recovery from the second big stroke, and it's called Arms of Hope. And maybe, I don't know, before you introduce it, maybe you could, I felt like this is one of these poems that can be for anybody who's in any kind of limbo, like stuck, should I stay in my job or should I leave? Should I, should we have children or shouldn't we have children? Should I, whatever it is, sort of a thing. So, but maybe speak, if you can speak to where it came out of.
yeah, I'm honestly don't remember. I think it was probably centered around, well, I'm sure it was centered around ending my marriage.
Okay.
And partly is because all of those cultural messages about, stand by your man or woman, or that, you don't leave a disabled person, or you don't, there's just so much cultural stuff that goes with that. And really getting to a place where I knew I had to make the decision that was best for us, not regardless of how it was judged. And so this poem kind of came out of that place and that standing in that limbo. So I'm happy to read it.
Thank you.
So it's called Arms of Hope. Standing on a fault line, 1 foot in my old way of being, 1 foot in the new. My world is shaking. I no longer can stay in this space. I'm fully aware. I know I have to choose. Will I choose fear and fall back, keeping myself safe and unspeakably lonely? Or will I choose faith in my true self and fall into the unknown, into the beautiful arms of hope?
So good. So good. When I read that, I really related back to my old world of, when I was thinking about leaving my job in pathology. And so I think for anybody who's, just that it's so scary. And yet on some level, we know something about what the only way we really can go forward. Now you have written that. Now, a lot of people want to write a book and say they would like to write a book. But what you and I both know is like, it is a hero's journey of the highest. And this book is so well done, Devon. And I'm just wondering, like, how, I know you got the spiritual guidance to do it. So you sort of had that. That's powerful because then we have a why. We know we're listening to that higher self. But what would you say was, what were the things that made it possible for you to finish this book?
Oh my, it took a lot, because there was a lot inside of me that was fighting against, doing it because it's visible and, scary, and a lot of imposter stuff about, I have a master's degree in counseling, not in, fine arts or writing or anything. So it's like, I'm not a writer. That was, so I had all of those messages that were stuck inside of me. And so I started with coaching. I went to a life coach many 10 years ago for the first time, and worked on coming out of the closet basically as a writer. I had always written, but had never shared. I hadn't shared my poetry. I hadn't shared anything. So it was like, and then this person I was working with, her name is Sully Taylor. She's amazing. She had me write a poem to my critics, my inner critics, as well as my external critics. And that became a guide for me as I kind of moved through it. But then I just wrote for a bunch of years, kind of on my own, not really sharing much. And eventually I got into a writing group. the kind of writing group where you share your work. And that was my first kind of, and it was little small groups, which was perfect. And I was very specific about the feedback I wanted. It's like, does this touch you? Or does this resonate? Didn't want grammar check kind of feedback. And I became more comfortable through that process. I did that for a few years. And then continued to write. And then two more kind of blessings. One was joining your group of writers, the accountability and support group, so that I could continue to write and feel supported and do that in community, because that became very important to me. Otherwise, I have a tendency to just kind of shelve things forever. And I didn't want to shelve it. I wanted to actually finish it. And then the other kind of beautiful thing that happened was learning about structure from Grace Karina. And because I had all these stories written, I had written in present tense because I wanted people to like be there with me on the journey. I chose my audience was myself at a younger age. So when I chose myself when I was going through this. So I didn't feel like I had to censor it or meet anybody's expectations other than my own. And then finding the structure that worked for me through Grace's work was really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And just all those things that I noticed, I think it was in the book, you said it was like in 2013, you began to think about writing a book. And here we are in 2023. Like sometimes these things take time, the story needs to, or we need to like have some more plot twists before we're ready, especially if it's memoir, like we're ready to really, we've got enough distance from the story that we can really tell it.
Yeah. And at that time, my former husband, he had just had his second stroke, and we had no idea what the aftermath was going to be at that point. I still thought he would recover completely, and so yeah.
Wow. I guess what I wanted to ask you to offer two pieces of advice to our listeners. The first one would be for anybody who's going through a major medical thing with a partner or a beloved, like, and is concerned or already has lost themselves in playing the role of caregiver or such. Like, what would you offer to that person, or what would you suggest if they wanted your advice?
That's such a big question. I think some of the couple of things that were the most impactful for me, I can just say that. One was something that a therapist said, couples therapist said to us, which I was really struggling with. Do I leave my marriage or not leave my marriage? And that was a constant thread. And I was strongly tied to that cultural thing that, I took a vow and I didn't want to do that. But I think at one point it was, did you take a vow to make each other miserable? And I really had to think about that, because that was not what we vowed to do. And we were both really unhappy. So I think it's really about stepping beyond the cultural messages or the messages, and really looking at how you want to live your life. And then another piece was also related to that decision, was thinking I was hiding it from my kids, and having my kids, come forth with, questions that made it really clear that we were not hiding what was going on from our kids. And also thinking of Glennon Doyle's words about, I'll paraphrase because I don't remember exactly, but something about, I'm staying in this marriage for my kids, but would I want this marriage for my kids? And I was just like, no, I don't want that for my kids. So I think that was just, to really drop in and look at those questions. Yeah. And that we have just as much right to have a good life as anyone else. And, that I'm not a sacrificial,
Yeah.
thing.
By sacrificing ourselves, that's not right either. Yeah, that's
Right?
not teaching the right lesson to anybody.
No, and it's very hard on the person, in my case, someone who is disabled, to know that they're part of that. I mean, that was really hard on me. He didn't want me to sacrifice my life for that. And and I know that there are cases where there may not be other options, but there may be. I didn't think there was other options, and there are. And so,
There are.
yeah, yeah.
And it's so beautiful how the two of you have kind of formed this amazing partnership to be with your girls, your beautiful family, and to step forward in a way that it feels like there's this revolution happening in the way that people are keeping their family intact in a sense, even though the romantic part of that relationship has dissolved, but that the family goes on with its own new format.
Yeah, and not judging it. I mean, think that was hard because, I think when you think of divorced parents, that they split the time and all that, and it's like, I have full custody of the kids. We share legal custody, but I have full physical custody of the kids because he has them when he's able and when it works for him. And we share, we drew up our own kind of divorce, documents when we did a legal divorce, but I was like, we're not choosing holidays. We're not doing any of that crap. We're gonna do this as people and not as, this is court ordered. So finding our own way, and not judging it. And our kids are, just, this is what's normal for them. And
Yeah. That's so great. Being curious and then being creative, I mean, those things that we can form what we need, even though it doesn't yet exist, but we can we can hammer that out together.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Devon, for being here. So the book is, you guys, The Reluctant Caregiver, Reclaiming My Life After Caring for a Stroke Survivor, a memoir, and it's available at Amazon. And I don't know if is it available at regular bookstores too?
It's available on Barnes and Noble as well.
Okay.
And it's in a lot of several libraries. It's at, so I mean, if you want to request it at your library, see if they'll order it, do that. But yeah, but Amazon and Barnes and Noble for now, and both print on both of those, and then it's also available on Kindle if people want to.
And it's such a wonderful read. I like devoured it in 2 days. So kudos and congratulations, Devon.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.